Sometimes the most powerful words come from the most unexpected people. Marcus Chen had built his empire by saying no to almost everyone. At 34, he was worth $3 billion, owned hotels across 5 continents, and had never let anyone close enough to hurt him. His lunch table at the exclusive Meridian Club was always empty, except for him, his phone, and his carefully guarded heart. But on that rainy Tuesday in October, a 7-year-old girl with paint-stained fingers and courage bigger than her tiny frame would ask him 4 simple words that would crack open everything he thought he knew about success, loneliness, and what it really means to be rich. "Can I join you?" She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't care about his reputation for being cold and unreachable. She just saw an empty chair and a man eating lunch alone. What happened next would change both their lives forever, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths, and the most innocent questions can heal the deepest wounds. This is their story. A story about finding family in the most unlikely places, discovering that wealth means nothing without someone to share it with, and learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask to belong. Marcus Chen adjusted his silver watch and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Meridian Club's dining room. The October rain painted vertical streaks down the glass, blurring the city below into an impressionist masterpiece. At 34, he had grown accustomed to eating lunch alone. It wasn't by accident, it was by design. The exclusive club's dining room buzzed with the quiet conversations of politicians, celebrities, and business moguls, but Marcus preferred his corner table where he could observe without being observed. His black suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair precisely styled, and his expression carefully neutral. 3 years of therapy had taught him to recognize this as his armor, but knowing something and changing it were 2 different battles entirely. His phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. Another merger proposal. Another opportunity to expand his hotel empire. Another chance to add more zeros to his already impressive net worth. Marcus Chen Hotels had properties in New York, London, Tokyo, Dubai, and Sydney. He owned penthouses he'd never slept in and vacation homes he'd never visited. Success, by every measurable standard, surrounded him like expensive cologne. Yet as he picked at his salmon and quinoa salad, Marcus couldn't shake the familiar weight in his chest. The feeling that had been his constant companion since his parents died in that car accident when he was 26. The feeling that had only grown heavier as his bank account grew larger. The feeling that no amount of money could buy what he really wanted, but was too afraid to admit he needed. The dining room's atmosphere shifted slightly when the club's community outreach coordinator, Sarah Williams, entered with a small group of children. Marcus recognized the monthly charity lunch program where underprivileged kids were brought to experience fine dining and meet successful professionals. He usually scheduled his meals to avoid these events. Children made him uncomfortable with their unfiltered honesty and their ability to see through the walls adults spent years building. But today his assistant had booked his table without checking the calendar, and now he found himself inadvertently part of the background scenery as 8 children, ranging from about 6 to 10 years old, were seated at tables throughout the dining room. Their chaperones, volunteers from the local community center, tried to help them navigate the formal place settings and explain proper dining etiquette. Marcus tried to focus on his emails, but his attention kept drifting to the children's conversations. Their excitement was infectious as they marveled at cloth napkins, multiple forks, and water glasses that were automatically refilled. One little boy asked his chaperone if he could take a dinner roll home to his sister. A girl with pigtails carefully folded her napkin exactly as she'd been shown, her tongue poking out in concentration. It was the girl at the table nearest to him who caught his attention most. She appeared to be around 7 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair that looked like it had been braided that morning but had since come partially undone. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, a purple sweater with a small hole near the left elbow and jeans that were slightly too long, cuffed at the bottom. But what struck Marcus most were her eyes. They were wise in a way that children's eyes shouldn't be, as if she'd already learned lessons most people didn't master until adulthood. She sat quietly while the other children chatted excitedly, methodically eating her chicken and vegetables with the precision of someone who had learned not to waste food. Every few minutes, she would glance around the room, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings, and the adults in expensive suits who inhabited this world so different from her own.
Marcus found himself watching her with growing curiosity.
Unlike the other children, she didn't seem intimidated by the fancy surroundings. She observed everything with the careful attention of someone trying to understand how this different world worked. When her chaperone explained which fork to use for the salad, she nodded seriously and practiced the motion before actually eating.
The girl finished her meal before the others and sat patiently, her hands folded in her lap.
Marcus noticed she kept glancing at his table, not at him specifically, but at the empty chairs surrounding him, while all the other tables in the dining room were full of conversation and laughter. His table stood like an island of solitude in a sea of connection. When her chaperone got up to help another child who had spilled some water, the girl saw her opportunity. She stood up, smoothed down her sweater, and walked directly to Marcus's table. Her steps were small but determined, and she carried herself with a dignity that seemed far beyond her years. Marcus looked up from his phone, startled by her approach. Most adults in this room wouldn't dare interrupt him during a meal without an appointment. Yet here was this child, standing beside his table with paint stains under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice clear and steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Can I join you?" 4 simple words that somehow contained more honesty than most of the conversations he'd had in months. She wasn't asking because she knew who he was or what he was worth. She wasn't trying to network or gain favor or pitch him a business proposition. She was simply a child who noticed that he was sitting alone and thought maybe he might like some company. Marcus stared at her for a moment, his mind racing through all the reasons he should politely decline. He had calls to make, emails to answer, an acquisition to review. His carefully ordered world had no room for spontaneous conversations with 7-year-old girls who saw empty chairs and thought of loneliness rather than privacy. But something in her eyes stopped him from saying no. Maybe it was the way she stood there without fidgeting, prepared to accept whatever answer he gave with grace. Maybe it was the way she'd asked the question, as if his response actually mattered to her, not for what she could gain, but for what she could give. Or maybe it was the simple recognition that she had just asked him the one question no one had bothered to ask in years. Marcus began, then found himself genuinely uncertain of what to say. When had he last been uncertain about anything? When had he last encountered a situation that wasn't covered in his mental playbook of appropriate responses? The girl waited patiently, her head tilted slightly to one side. She seemed to sense his hesitation wasn't rejection but confusion, and she was prepared to wait while he figured it out. Marcus glanced around the dining room. Several adults had noticed the interaction and were watching with curiosity. Sarah Williams, the outreach coordinator, was making her way over, probably to apologize for the child's breach of etiquette. In about 30 seconds, this moment would be over, managed and smoothed away like all the other unexpected moments in his carefully controlled life. But for these 30 seconds, Marcus had a choice. He could maintain his walls, protect his solitude, and send this brave little girl back to her table with a polite but firm rejection. Or he could do something he hadn't done in years. He could say yes to something that wasn't part of his plan. Marcus looked at the girl again, really looked at her, and saw something that made his chest tighten. She was nervous, he realized. Despite her composed exterior, she was actually nervous about his answer. This wasn't easy for her either. She had seen him sitting alone and had worked up the courage to approach a strange adult in a formal setting because she thought he might need a friend. When had anyone last thought he might need a friend? "Yes, you can join me." The girl's face lit up with a smile that was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. It was the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that Marcus had almost forgotten existed. She walked around the table and climbed onto the chair across from him, having to scoot forward to reach the table properly. "Thank you," she said seriously, as if he'd just granted her the greatest favor in the world. "I'm Emma. Emma Rodriguez." "I'm Marcus," he replied, then found himself adding, "Marcus Chen." Emma nodded, as if his name was the most important piece of information she'd learned all day. "It's very nice to meet you, Mr. Key." "Marcus. That's a really big table for just one person." The observation was made without judgment, just a simple statement of fact delivered with the honesty that only children possessed. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, like a door he'd kept locked for years was being gently pushed open. "It is a big table," he agreed, looking at the empty chairs surrounding them. "I usually eat alone."
"Why?" Emma asked, her head tilted with genuine curiosity.
It was such a simple question, but Marcus found himself genuinely considering it for the first time in years. Why did he eat alone? Why had he structured his entire life around solitude? The easy answers, privacy, efficiency, control, suddenly seemed insufficient when faced with Emma's direct gaze. "I work a lot," he said finally, which was true, but not the whole truth. Emma nodded solemnly. "My mama works a lot too," She says sometimes grown-ups forget that eating together is more fun than eating alone. Before Marcus could respond to this observation, Sarah Williams arrived at their table, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the dining room.
Emma, sweetie, I'm so sorry,
Sarah said, her face flushed with embarrassment. Come back to your table. We don't want to bother the other guests. But Emma looked at Marcus with a question in her eyes, as if seeking his opinion on whether she was actually bothering him. The trust in that look, the assumption that his opinion mattered and that he would answer honestly, caught Marcus completely off guard. She's not bothering me, Marcus heard himself say, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made boardrooms fall silent. She's welcome to stay. She clearly recognized him and understood the significance of his statement. Are you sure, Mr. Carver? Chen? The children can be quite chatty. Marcus looked at Emma, who was watching this exchange with the keen interest of someone learning how adult negotiations worked. She wasn't begging or pleading to stay, she was simply waiting to see what would be decided, prepared to accept the outcome with dignity, either way. I'm sure, Marcus said. Emma and I were just getting acquainted. Sarah nodded, still looking slightly stunned, and retreated to give the other children their attention. Marcus and Emma were left alone again, and he realized he had no idea how to continue a conversation with a 7-year-old girl. Emma saved him from his uncertainty by pointing to his barely touched salad. Don't you like your food? It looks really fancy. Marcus glanced down at his meal, which he'd been picking at absently. It's fine. I guess I wasn't very hungry. Emma considered this seriously. Sometimes when I'm sad, food doesn't taste as good. Are you sad, Mr. Marcus? The question was asked with such gentle directness that Marcus felt his carefully constructed defenses crack a little wider. How long had it been since someone had asked him how he felt? How long it had been since he'd allowed himself to even consider the question? I don't know, he answered honestly, surprising himself with the admission. I haven't really thought about it. Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes I don't know if I'm sad either. Especially when I'm trying really hard not to be sad about something. But my mama says it's okay to feel sad sometimes, as long as you don't stay sad forever. Marcus found himself genuinely curious about this wise little girl who spoke about emotional complexity with the matter-of-fact tone most people reserved for discussing the weather. What kinds of things make you sad? Emma was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs from the chair that was slightly too big for her. Sometimes I'm sad that my daddy isn't here anymore. He went to heaven when I was 5. And sometimes I'm sad that Mama has to work so many jobs and gets really tired. But then I remember the good things, like when she makes pancakes on Sunday, or when we watch movies together. And the sad gets a little smaller. Marcus felt something heavy settle in his stomach. This child, who had approached his table with such joy and confidence, was carrying her own grief. Yet somehow she'd learned to hold both the sadness and the happiness, to acknowledge loss without being consumed by it. I'm sorry about your dad, Marcus said quietly, meaning it more than he'd meant most things he'd said in recent memory. Thank you, Emma replied with the same serious courtesy she'd shown since sitting down. Were you sad when your daddy went to heaven? The assumption that his father was dead caught Marcus off guard, but he realized Emma was probably applying her own experience to his situation. It would be natural for a child who'd lost a parent to assume that other people's sadness might have similar origins. My parents both died when I was older, Marcus found himself saying. In a car accident. I was 28-6. Emma's eyes filled with sympathy. That must have made you very sad. It did, Marcus admitted, feeling strange about discussing something so personal with someone he'd just met. But Emma's presence somehow made honesty feel safer than his usual careful deflections. Do you still miss them? Emma asked. Every day, Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Emma nodded solemnly. I think that's how love works. When someone goes to heaven, the love doesn't go away, so you miss them because the love has nowhere to go. Marcus stared at this 7-year-old girl who had just articulated something he'd been unable to put into words for 8 years. She'd summed up the exact nature of his grief with the kind of clarity that usually came from decades of therapy or philosophy, not from childhood wisdom. That's very wise, he said softly. Emma shrugged, a gesture that seemed both childlike and old beyond her years. Mama says I think too much about big things. She says I should think more about kid things like toys and games. What do you think about that? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Emma considered the question carefully, as she seemed to consider everything. I think toys and games are fun, but they're not as interesting as people. People are like puzzles, but good puzzles. where figuring them out helps you understand yourself too. Marcus felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. You definitely think about big things. Is that okay? Emma asked, and Marcus heard a slight uncertainty in her voice for the first time. It's more than okay, he assured her. It's wonderful. The world needs people who think about big things. Emma's smile returned, brighter than before, and Marcus realized that his approval meant something to her. When had he last encountered someone who valued his opinion for something other than his business acumen or his wealth? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Emma swinging her legs and Marcus trying to process the unexpected turn his lunch had taken. Around them, the dining room continued its usual rhythm of quiet conversations and clinking silverware, but their table felt separate from all of that, existing in its own bubble of honest connection.
Mr. Marcus, Emma said eventually, can I ask you something?
Of course.
Why do you eat lunch alone every day?
Marcus paused, fork halfway to his mouth. How do you know I eat alone every day? Emma looked slightly embarrassed.
Miss Sarah told us about all the important people who come here, and she pointed you out. She said, you're very successful, but that you always sit by yourself. I was watching you before I came over, and you looked lonely. The word hit Marcus with unexpected force. Lonely. Such a simple word for such a complex feeling. He'd spent years convincing himself that he preferred solitude, that isolation was a choice rather than a consequence. But this child had seen through all of that in a matter of minutes. I guess I am lonely, he admitted, the words feeling strange and vulnerable in his mouth. Emma nodded seriously. I get lonely too sometimes, especially at school when the other kids talk about their daddies. But Mama says loneliness is like hunger. It tells you that you need something, and when you figure out what it is, you can do something about it. Marcus set down his fork, giving Emma his full attention. What do you think loneliness is telling me I need? Emma tilted her head, studying him with those wise eyes. Maybe it's telling you that you need friends, or maybe family, or maybe just people who care about you, not because of your job, but because of who you are. The accuracy of her assessment was breathtaking. Marcus had spent years building an empire, but had somehow forgotten to build a life. He had employees and business associates and accountants and lawyers, but when had he last had a conversation with someone who cared about his well-being rather than his wallet? That's very perceptive, Marcus said quietly. What's perceptive mean? Emma asked. It means you see things clearly, even when they're complicated. Emma seemed pleased with this definition. Mama says I see things different than other kids. Sometimes that makes me feel weird, but right now it feels good because I think I helped you figure something out. Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had approached his table with a simple question and had somehow managed to crack open truths he'd been avoiding for years. She was right. She had helped him figure something out. Or at least, she'd helped him start to figure it out. You did help me, he said honestly. Thank you. Emma beamed at him, and Marcus felt something warm expand in his chest. When had he last felt genuinely helpful to another person, rather than just useful for his money or connections? The moment was interrupted by Sarah Williams approaching their table again, this time with obvious reluctance. I'm sorry, Emma, but it's time for the group to head back to the community center. We need to clean up and get everyone ready for pickup. Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the same dignified acceptance she'd shown throughout their conversation. She climbed down from her chair and smoothed her sweater again. Thank you for letting me join you, Mr. Marcus, she said formally. I had a really nice time talking with you. As she started to walk away, Marcus felt something that might have been panic rising in his chest. This connection, this unexpected moment of genuine human interaction, was about to disappear back into the carefully controlled isolation of his daily routine.
Emma!
He called out, causing both her and Sarah to turn back.
Would you like to have lunch again sometime? Emma's face lit up with surprise and joy. Really, you'd want to? I would, Marcus said, and realized he meant it more than he'd meant anything in a very long time. Emma looked at Sarah, who was clearly trying to process this unexpected development. Would that be okay, Miss Sarah? Sarah looked between Emma and Marcus, her expression cycling through surprise, uncertainty, and what might have been hope. Well, if Mr. Chen is serious about the offer, I am, Marcus said firmly. Very serious. Emma practically bounced with excitement. Can we do it next week? And can I tell you more about my mama and my school and my favorite books? I'd like that very much, Marcus said, and was surprised to discover that he genuinely meant it. As Emma rejoined her group and began gathering her things, Marcus remained at his table, staring at the empty chair where she'd been sitting. For the first time in years, the silence around him felt different. Not peaceful or protective, but simply empty. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his assistant's number, then paused before typing. What was he going to say? That he wanted to schedule a lunch date with a 7-year-old? That a child had just given him more insight into his own life than 3 years of professional therapy? Instead, he found Sarah Williams' contact information through the club's directory and sent her a brief message asking about the process for arranging individual mentoring sessions through the community outreach program. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it properly. As Marcus finally finished his cold salad and prepared to leave, he caught a glimpse of Emma through the windows, walking with her group toward the waiting bus. She turned back toward the building and waved, her small hand creating a brief arc against the grey October sky. Marcus found himself waving back, a gesture that felt both foreign and completely natural. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to lunch. Marcus spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon in a state he hadn't experienced since childhood, anticipation mixed with nervousness. He'd rearranged 3 meetings and delayed a conference call with investors in Tokyo, all to accommodate a lunch date with a 7-year-old girl who had somehow managed to see through his carefully constructed walls in the span of 20 minutes. By Thursday, he had received approval from the community center's director and child services for supervised mentoring visits. The process had been surprisingly thorough, involving background checks, references, and a lengthy interview about his intentions. Marcus had never been more grateful for his clean record and charitable giving history. When Sarah Williams called to confirm the arrangements, her voice carried a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed wonder. "Emma hasn't stopped talking about you," she told him. "She's been asking every day if it's time for your lunch yet. She even practiced using proper silverware at home." The image of Emma carefully practicing fork placement in whatever small apartment she shared with her mother made Marcus's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He found himself wondering what her home looked like, what her daily routine involved, what struggles she and her mother faced that he took completely for granted. Tuesday arrived, grey and drizzling, matching the previous week's weather. Marcus arrived at the Meridian Club 30 minutes early, a punctuality extreme even for him. He'd chosen the same corner table, though he'd asked the staff to provide child-friendly modifications, a booster seat, plastic cups instead of crystal, and a simplified lunch menu with options he hoped a 7-year-old would enjoy. When Emma walked into the dining room, Marcus felt his nervousness dissolve into something warmer. She was wearing a different outfit this time, a red sweater that looked newer than the previous week's purple one, and the same jeans, though they'd been hemmed properly. Her hair was neatly braided and tied with a red ribbon that matched her sweater. Someone had clearly made an effort for this occasion. "Mr. Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet dining room and causing several heads to turn. She walked toward his table with the same determined stride as before, but this time her nervousness was replaced with genuine excitement. "Hello, Emma," Marcus said, standing up as she approached. The gesture was automatic, a remnant of his upbringing, but Emma's eyes widened with surprise and pleasure at the courtesy. "You stood up for me," she observed, climbing into her chair.
Mama told me that when someone stands up when you come to the table, it means they think you're important.
"You are important," Marcus said simply, taking his own seat. The words came out more earnestly than he'd intended, but Emma's resulting smile made him glad he'd said them.
Emma settled herself in her chair and looked around the dining room with the same careful observation she'd shown the previous week. "It looks exactly the same as last time. I thought maybe I remembered it wrong, but everything is just as fancy as I remembered. Do you like fancy things?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Emma considered this seriously, as she seemed to consider everything. "I think fancy things are interesting to look at, but they're not as important as kind people. This place is very pretty, but what made me want to come back was you being nice to me." Marcus felt that familiar crack in his chest, the sensation of walls he built for protection being gently dismantled by honest observations. "I'm glad you came back," he said. "I was looking forward to seeing you again." "Really?" Emma's eyes lit up. "I was looking forward to it too. I wrote down questions I wanted to ask you so I wouldn't forget them." She reached into a small backpack that Marcus hadn't noticed her carrying and pulled out a piece of paper covered in careful 7-year-old handwriting. The sight of her preparation, the evidence that their meeting mattered enough for her to plan for it, moved him more than he'd expected. "You wrote down questions?" Marcus asked. Emma nodded proudly. "Mama helped me with the spelling." She said, when you're going to talk to someone important, you should think about what you want to know about them. Marcus found himself curious about Emma's mother, this woman who was raising such a thoughtful, empathetic child while working multiple jobs and dealing with her own grief.
"Tell me about your mama," he said. "What's she like?" Emma's face brightened immediately. "She's the best mama in the whole world. She works really, really hard. She cleans offices at night and she works at a grocery store during the day, and sometimes she does extra work helping people clean their houses on weekends." Marcus did quick mental math. 3 jobs, one of which involved night work, which meant Emma's mother was probably averaging 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night. "That does sound like very hard work," he said carefully.
When do you get to spend time together? In the mornings before school and on Sunday afternoons if she doesn't have extra work, Emma replied.
"And she always reads me a story before bed, even when she's really tired. Sometimes she falls asleep in the middle, but that's okay because I can usually remember how the story ends."
The casual way Emma described her mother's exhaustion, the matter-of-fact acceptance of interrupted bedtime stories, painted a picture of a childhood shaped by economic necessity in ways Marcus had never experienced.
His own parents had been comfortably middle class, and by the time they died, he'd already been well on his way to building his fortune.
He'd never known the particular stress of watching a parent work themselves to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. "Your mama sounds amazing," he said sincerely.
"It takes a lot of love to work that hard for your family." Emma nodded solemnly. "She says love isn't just saying nice words. It's doing hard things to take care of the people you care about.
That's why I help her by being good at school and not asking for things we can't buy." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest again, that same sensation of understanding something fundamental that he'd somehow missed before. Here was a child who understood sacrifice and responsibility in ways that many adults never grasped, who had learned to measure love not in gifts or grand gestures, but in daily acts of commitment and care.
"That's very wise," Marcus said. "Both you and your mama sound like very wise people." Emma beamed at the compliment. "Can I ask you one of my questions now?"
"Of course."
Emma consulted her piece of paper. "What made you want to build hotels, and do you like staying in them?"
The question caught Marcus off guard with its directness and its assumption that his business choices were driven by personal preference rather than just profit potential. When had anyone last asked him about the emotional reasons behind his professional decisions? "I started with one hotel," Marcus began slowly, finding himself wanting to give her a real answer rather than the polished explanation he usually offered to business reporters. It was a small place that was about to close down. The owner was an elderly man who had run it for 40 years, and he couldn't afford to fix all the things that were breaking.
Emma listened intently, her chin resting in her hands. "I helped him fix it up," Marcus continued, "and I realized that hotels are special places.
They're where people go when they're traveling somewhere important, or when they're celebrating something special, or when they need a place to feel safe when they're far from home. Every room has stories."
"What kinds of stories?" Emma asked, clearly captivated. Marcus found himself smiling as memories surfaced.
Wedding nights, family vacations, business trips where people make deals that change their lives. People saying goodbye and people falling in love, and people getting phone calls that change everything.
Hotels hold all of those moments. Emma nodded seriously. "So, you collect stories in buildings." The simplicity and accuracy of her summary struck Marcus speechless for a moment.
Yes, I suppose I do."
"That's beautiful," Emma said, with genuine admiration. "But you didn't answer the second part. Do you like staying in your own hotels?"
Marcus hesitated. The honest answer was that he rarely stayed in his own properties unless it was for business purposes, and when he did, he usually felt more like an inspector than a guest. "I don't stay in them very often," he admitted.
"Why not?"
Emma asked.
"If they're full of stories and special moments, wouldn't you want to be part of that?"
Marcus stared at this 7-year-old girl who had just identified a contradiction he'd never acknowledged, even to himself. He built places designed to create connection and comfort and memorable experiences, but he lived his life in isolation, avoiding the very human experiences his hotels were designed to facilitate. "I think I've forgotten how to be part of stories," he said quietly, the admission surprising him with its honesty. Emma studied his face with her serious eyes. "Maybe you just need practice." Stories happen when people are together and you spend a lot of time alone. Before Marcus could respond to this observation, their waitress arrived to take their orders.
Emma had clearly studied the simplified menu he'd requested and ordered grilled chicken with vegetables and a side of fruit. Marcus ordered the same. realizing he wanted to share the experience rather than maintain the distance of different choices. "Can I ask you another question?" Emma said once they were alone again. "As many as you want." Emma consulted her paper again. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" "No," Marcus said. "I was an only child. What about you?" "No brothers or sisters either," Emma replied. "But I always wished I had a big brother. Someone who could teach me things and protect me and be on my team." The wistfulness in her voice touched something deep in Marcus's chest. "What would you want a big brother to teach you?" Emma's eyes lit up as she considered the question. "How to ride a bike without training wheels. How to swim in the deep end of the pool. How to talk to kids at school who are mean sometimes. How to help Mama when she's really tired but won't admit it." Each item on Emma's list painted a picture of a child trying to navigate challenges that felt too big for her 7-year-old shoulders. Marcus found himself wondering what it would feel like to be the person someone looked up to for guidance and protection, rather than just for business deals and financial advice. "Those sound like very important things to learn," he said carefully. "Do you know how to do those things?" Emma asked hopefully. Marcus considered her question seriously. "I know how to ride a bike and swim. I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask about dealing with mean kids, though I have some experience with difficult people in business, and helping people you love when they're tired." He paused, thinking about his parents, about all the ways he'd failed to recognize their needs before it was too late. "I'm still learning that one." Emma nodded as if this admission made perfect sense to her. "Mama says growing up doesn't mean you stop learning new things. She says even grown-ups have to practice being better people." "Your mama is very smart," Marcus said. "I think I'd like to meet her sometime, if that would be okay." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Really? You'd want to meet her? She's been asking about you every day since last week. She wants to know what kind of person you are and if you're going to be nice to me." The idea that this woman he'd never met was concerned about his intentions towards her daughter was both touching and humbling. It reminded Marcus that Emma wasn't just a child who had wandered into his life. She was someone's entire world, someone's most precious responsibility.
"I'd be honored to meet her,"
Marcus said. "And I want her to know that I would never do anything to hurt you or make you uncomfortable." Emma smiled. "I know that. I can tell when people are safe and when they're not. You're safe." The simple declaration, delivered with complete confidence, made Marcus feel something he hadn't experienced in years, the weight of being trusted. Not for his money or his connections or his business acumen, but for his character. When had anyone last placed their trust in him based purely on their assessment of who he was as a person? Their food arrived, and they settled into a comfortable rhythm of eating and talking. Emma told him about her favorite subjects in school, reading and art, her best friend Sophia, who had moved away last month, and her goal of learning to make pancakes as good as her mother's. Marcus found himself sharing stories from his childhood, memories he hadn't thought about in years. He told her about the time he'd tried to build a fort in his backyard and had accidentally knocked over his mother's prize-winning roses, about his first job at 14, working at a neighborhood grocery store where he'd learnt the value of hard work and customer service, about his parents' reaction when he'd announced he wanted to study business instead of becoming a doctor like his father. "They were disappointed at first," Marcus admitted, "but they supported me anyway. They always said they wanted me to find work that made me happy, not just work that made them proud." Emma listened to every story with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she was really thinking about what he was telling her. When he mentioned his parents' support, her eyes grew thoughtful. "Do you think they would be proud of you now?" she asked gently. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, considering it seriously for the first time in years. Would his parents be proud of the empire he'd built? Would they be impressed by his financial success and his business reputation? Or would they be concerned about the isolation he'd wrapped around himself? The way he'd substituted achievement for connection? "I think they'd be proud of some things," he said slowly. "I think they'd be happy that I work hard and that I've been successful. But I think they might be worried about other things." Emma waited patiently for him to continue. "I think they'd be worried that I don't have people in my life who care about me," Marcus continued. "They'd probably be sad that I eat lunch alone every day and that I live in a big house with no one to share it with." Emma nodded seriously. "But you're trying to change that now, right? That's why we're having lunch together?" The innocence of her question, the assumption that their friendship was part of some larger effort on his part to build a more connected life, made Marcus realize that she was absolutely right. Whether he'd articulated it to himself or not, reaching out to her was indeed an attempt to change something fundamental about how he lived. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I am trying to change that." Emma smiled. Good. Because I think your parents would really like that you're being my friend. And I think they would like me too. The confidence with which she delivered this assessment, the assumption that his deceased parents would approve of their friendship, touched Marcus deeply. Emma had managed to transform his relationship with his parents' memory from a source of regret into a source of potential pride. I think they would love you, he said honestly. Just like I'm starting to. The words slipped out before Marcus could stop them. More honest than he'd intended to be. Emma's eyes widened with surprise and pleasure. You love me? She asked, as if this was the most wonderful news she'd heard in months. Marcus felt a moment of panic. Had he overstepped? Had he made her uncomfortable by expressing affection too quickly? But looking at Emma's face, he saw only joy and hope, no fear or confusion. I do, he said simply. You're a very easy person to love. Emma practically glowed with happiness. I love you too, Mr. Pelly. Marcus. You're the nicest grown-up friend I've ever had. They finished their lunch in comfortable conversation, and as the meal drew to a close, Marcus found himself dreading the moment when Emma would have to leave. The prospect of returning to his empty office, his silent phone calls, and his solitary dinner felt almost unbearable after the warmth of their shared hour. Emma, he said as she gathered her backpack, would you like to do this again next week? Yes, please, Emma replied enthusiastically. Can I bring my mama next time? She really, really wants to meet you. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of meeting the woman who had raised this remarkable child. What if Emma's mother disapproved of their friendship? What if she saw him as some wealthy man trying to buy his way into their lives? But, looking at Emma's hopeful face, Marcus realized that meeting her mother wasn't just something Emma wanted, it was something he needed. If he was going to be part of Emma's life, even in this small way, he needed to understand the full context of who she was and where she came from. I'd love to meet your mama, he said, but let's make sure she's comfortable with the idea first. Maybe you could ask her, and if she's interested, we can arrange something. Emma nodded seriously. I'll ask her tonight, but I know she'll say yes. She's been worried about me not having enough friends, and she'll be really happy that I found such a good one. As Emma headed toward the lobby where Sarah Williams was waiting to drive her back to the community center, Marcus remained at his table, processing the emotional weight of the past hour. For the second week in a row, a simple lunch had left him feeling fundamentally changed. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, unsure what to do with the energy Emma had stirred up in him. He wanted to take action, to channel this new sense of connection into something meaningful. But what? An idea began to form. Tentative at first, but growing stronger as he considered it. Emma had mentioned her mother's exhaustion, her multiple jobs, the careful way they managed their limited resources. What if there was a way he could help? Not with charity that might wound their pride, but with opportunities that would respect their dignity. Marcus opened his contacts and scrolled to his human resources director's number. If Emma's mother was as remarkable as her daughter, perhaps there might be a place for her in his organization. Not as a favor to Emma, but as a recognition of the kind of person who could raise such an extraordinary child. As he composed a carefully worded message about exploring employment opportunities for exceptional candidates from disadvantaged backgrounds, Marcus realized that Emma had given him something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a purpose that went beyond profit margins and expansion plans. For the first time in years, he was excited about the possibility of using his resources to change someone's life in ways that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with family. The thought of family made him pause. Was that what he was building with Emma? Was this 7-year-old girl becoming the family he'd never allowed himself to hope for? Marcus smiled as he sent the message to his HR director, then added a note to his calendar. Research family mentorship programs. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe he was just out of practice with stories. But perhaps it wasn't too late to start writing new ones. The call came on Thursday evening while Marcus was reviewing acquisition proposals in his penthouse office. Emma's voice was breathless with excitement when his assistant transferred the call. Mr. Bever? Marcus, Mama said yes. She wants to meet you on Saturday, if that's okay. She doesn't work on Saturday afternoons this week, and she said she can come to your fancy restaurant. Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that was becoming familiar whenever Emma entered his thoughts. Therefore, coming together. I'd be honored to meet her, Emma. But would she be more comfortable somewhere less formal? Maybe somewhere that feels more welcoming for both of you?
There was a pause as Emma consulted with someone in the background, presumably her mother.
When she returned to the phone, her voice carried a note of surprise. Mama wants to know if you would like to come to our apartment instead.
She's making her special lasagna on Saturday, and she says food always tastes better when you share it with someone who matters to you.
The invitation to their home caught Marcus completely off guard. He'd been prepared for a careful, public meeting in neutral territory.
The idea of being welcomed into their private space, of being trusted with access to their daily life, felt both precious and terrifying. "I would love that," he heard himself saying.
"But only if I can bring dessert, and maybe some flowers for your mama?" Emma's delighted squeal nearly burst his eardrums. "Mama, he wants to bring flowers," she called out, then returned to the phone. "She's smiling really big, Mr. Janti. Marcus, she said to tell you that would be very nice, but you don't have to bring anything except yourself."
"I want to," Marcus insisted. "It's important to me." They arranged the details, and Marcus spent Friday morning in a state he hadn't experienced since his first major business presentation. Nervous preparation. He visited 3 different flower shops before finding the perfect arrangement. Bright sunflowers mixed with white roses, cheerful without being ostentatious. He also stopped by the city's best bakery and selected a chocolate cake that looked homemade rather than commercial, hoping it would feel like a contribution to the meal rather than a statement about his wealth. Saturday afternoon found Marcus standing outside a modest apartment complex in a neighborhood he'd never visited, despite living in the same city for 8 years. The building was older but well-maintained, with small gardens planted by residents and children's toys scattered in the courtyard. It felt like a real community, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and looked out for each other's children. Emma must have been watching for him because she appeared in the lobby before he could even announce his arrival. She was practically vibrating with excitement, wearing a yellow dress that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes.
"You came, you really came," she exclaimed, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a hug that caught him completely off guard.
Marcus stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple affection of the gesture, before carefully placing his free hand on her back. "Of course I came," he said softly. "I've been looking forward to this all week."
Emma stepped back to examine his offerings. "Are those for Mama? They're so pretty. She's going to love them. She told me this morning that she couldn't remember the last time someone brought her flowers." The casual mention of her mother's lack of romantic attention made Marcus acutely aware of the complexities of their situation. He was entering the life of a single mother who was probably exhausted, possibly lonely, and undoubtedly protective of her daughter. He needed to be careful to respect boundaries while still being genuine about his growing affection for Emma. "They're just a small thank you for inviting me," Marcus said carefully. Emma grabbed his free hand and began pulling him towards the elevator. "Come on." Mama's been cooking all morning, and she changed her outfit 3 times. She's nervous, but the good kind of nervous. Like when you're excited about something, but you want it to go really well. As they rode the elevator to the 4th floor, Emma chatted about her week at school and her excitement about introducing her 2 favorite people to each other. Marcus found himself wondering what kind of woman had raised such an emotionally intelligent, empathetic child while managing the stress of multiple jobs and single parenthood. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway that smelled like garlic and herbs and something indefinably homey. Emma led him to apartment 4B and knocked on the door in what was clearly a prearranged pattern. "Mama, he's here and he brought you flowers." The door opened and Marcus found himself face to face with Maria Rodriguez. She was smaller than he'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the same warm brown eyes as Emma and dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress that looked like it had been chosen with care, and her hands showed the signs of hard work, calluses and small scars that spoke of physical labor and sacrifice. But what struck Marcus most was her smile. It was Emma's smile, warm and genuine and completely without artifice. When she looked at him, he saw curiosity and caution, but also kindness and the same emotional intelligence that made Emma so special. "Chen," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for being so kind to Emma. I'm Maria Rodriguez." "Please, call me Marcus," he replied, shaking her hand gently. "And thank you for inviting me. These are for you." He offered the flowers, suddenly worried they might be too much, too formal for the casual warmth of their home. Maria's eyes widened as she accepted the bouquet, and Marcus watched her face cycle through surprise, pleasure, and something that might have been tears quickly blinked away. "They're beautiful," she said softly. It's been a long time since anyone brought me flowers. Thank you." Emma bounced beside them, clearly delighted with the interaction. "I told you she'd love them, and wait until you see our apartment, Mr. P. Marcus. Ma made it really pretty." As Maria stepped aside to let him in, Marcus entered a space that was small but filled with warmth and personality.
The furniture was second-hand but carefully chosen and lovingly maintained. The walls were covered with Emma's artwork, photographs of the two of them, and a few framed inspirational quotes. The apartment was spotlessly clean and decorated with small touches that spoke of creativity and care. Handmade curtains, plants thriving on every available surface, and books stacked everywhere.
Emma, why don't you show Marcus around while I put these flowers in water? Maria suggested. Emma immediately took on the role of tour guide, proudly showing off their small living room, the kitchen where something delicious was clearly simmering, and her bedroom, which was an explosion of color and creativity. The walls were covered with her drawings and paintings, and a small desk by the window was set up as an art station. This is where I do my homework and my art, Emma explained.
And this is my reading corner, where Mama reads to me every night. She pointed to a small armchair with a lamp and a basket full of library books. You have a wonderful room, Marcus said, genuinely impressed by how much personality and joy had been packed into such a small space.
Mama says home isn't about how big your house is, it's about how much love is inside it, Emma said matter-of-factly.
Marcus felt that familiar sensation of a fundamental truth being delivered through childlike wisdom. Looking around the small apartment that radiated warmth and care, he thought about his own sprawling penthouse with its expensive furniture and empty rooms. They returned to the living room to find Maria emerging from the kitchen, the sunflowers now arranged in a simple vase on the dining table. She changed into an apron that read, "World's Best Chef," in Emma's careful handwriting, clearly a homemade gift.
I hope you're hungry, Maria said. Emma told me you like Italian food, so I made my grandmother's lasagna recipe.
It's nothing fancy, but it's made with love. It smells incredible, Marcus said honestly. And anything made with love is automatically fancy in my book. Maria smiled at this response, and Marcus saw some of the tension leave her shoulders.
Emma, can you help me get the salad ready? Marcus, please make yourself comfortable.
Can I get you something to drink? I have water, soda, coffee. Water would be perfect. Thank you. As Maria and Emma worked together in the kitchen with the easy rhythm of established routine, Marcus observed their interaction with fascination. Despite the stress that must be inherent in their financial situation, their relationship was clearly one of mutual respect and affection.
Emma helped without being asked, anticipating her mother's needs, while Maria included her daughter in every aspect of meal preparation.
Emma tells me you've been very kind to her. Maria called from the kitchen. She talks about you constantly. Marcus this, Marcus that. I was starting to think she'd made you up. She talks about you constantly too, Marcus replied.
She's very proud of her mama. Maria appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand, and Marcus saw emotion flicker across her face. She's everything to me.
The light of my whole world.
This simple declaration, delivered without drama or sentimentality, hit Marcus with unexpected force. When had he last heard love expressed with such quiet certainty? When had he last felt the security of being someone's everything?
She's remarkable, he said quietly. You've raised an extraordinary daughter.
Maria's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away.
I try my best. Some days I worry it's not enough, that she deserves more than I can give her. If I may say so, Marcus said carefully, I think you're giving her the most important things.
Love, values, security. The rest is just details.
Maria studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether his words were genuine or just polite conversation. Whatever she saw seemed to reassure her because her smile returned.
Emma said you lost your parents when you were young, she said gently. I'm sorry.
That must have been very difficult. Marcus was touched that Emma had shared this detail and that Maria had chosen to acknowledge it.
It was.
But talking to Emma has helped me remember the good parts of having them, not just the sadness of losing them. She has a gift for that, Maria agreed. Sometimes I think she's too wise for her own good. Other kids her age are worrying about toys and games, and she's trying to figure out how to solve everyone's problems. Is that difficult for you? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the challenges of parenting such an emotionally mature child.
Maria considered the question as she returned to the kitchen. Sometimes I worry that she's growing up too fast, that she feels responsible for taking care of me instead of the other way around.
But then I see how much joy she gets from helping people, and I realize it's not burden for her, it's who she is. Dinner was ready shortly after, and they gathered around the small dining table, with its cheerful sunflower centerpiece. The lasagna was indeed incredible, rich and complex with layers of flavor that spoke of hours of careful preparation. Marcus found himself wondering when he'd last eaten a meal prepared by someone who cared about his enjoyment of it, rather than just fulfilling a professional obligation.
This is amazing, Maria, he said after his first bite. Emma wasn't exaggerating when she said you were the best cook in the world. Maria blushed with pleasure. It's my grandmother's recipe. She taught me that food is love made visible. That's beautiful, Marcus said.
Did she teach you other recipes too?
Oh, yes, Maria replied, her eyes lighting up. I have a whole collection of family recipes.
Someday I'd love to, she trailed off, looking embarrassed.
What?
Emma prompted.
Tell him about your dream, Mama. Maria shot her daughter a look that was half affection, half exasperation. It's silly.
Just something I think about sometimes. It's not silly, Emma insisted, then turned to Marcus. Mama wants to open her own restaurant someday. She has all these amazing recipes and ideas for how to make it feel like home for people who are far away from their families.
Marcus felt something click into place in his mind. Here was a woman with talent, vision, and work ethic who was trapped in survival mode by circumstances beyond her control. Here was someone whose dreams had been deferred by necessity but not abandoned. That doesn't sound silly at all, he said carefully. It sounds like a beautiful dream. What kind of restaurant would you want? Maria hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was the best approach.
Something small and cozy. The kind of place where people come not just for the food, but for the feeling of being welcomed.
I'd want families to feel comfortable bringing their children, and people eating alone to feel like they belonged.
Marcus thought about his own solitary meals at the Meridian Club, about the sterile perfection of most upscale restaurants, about the hunger he'd been carrying for exactly the kind of warmth Maria was describing. The world needs more places like that, he said sincerely. They spent the rest of dinner talking about food, family, and dreams. Maria shared stories about her grandmother's restaurant in Mexico, about learning to cook as a child, about the comfort she found in feeding people.
Emma contributed her own observations about which of her mother's dishes were her favorites and why. Marcus found himself sharing memories of his parents' dinner table, of the way his mother had made even simple meals feel special through her attention and care.
As they finished eating, Emma yawned widely, and Maria immediately went into mother mode.
Someone needs to get ready for bed soon, she said gently.
But, Mama, Marcus just got here,
Emma protested.
Can't I stay up a little longer?
Marcus checked his watch, surprised to discover they'd been talking for over 2 hours.
Time had passed without his notice, a rare occurrence in his carefully scheduled life. Your mama's right, he said.
But maybe we could arrange another visit soon, if your mama doesn't mind.
Emma looked hopefully at her mother, who was clearly processing the implications of her daughter's growing attachment to this man she was still getting to know.
We'll see, Maria said diplomatically. Let's get you ready for bed first. Emma hugged Marcus goodnight with the same easy affection she'd shown when he arrived, and Maria took her daughter to get ready for bed. Marcus used the time alone to look around their living room more carefully, noticing the small details that revealed their life together. Emma's school certificates on the refrigerator, a small jar labeled Dream Fund with a few dollars in coins, photographs that chronicled Emma's growth from toddler to the remarkable child she was now. When Maria returned, she looked tired but content, the way parents do after successfully managing the complex logistics of bedtime routines.
She's brushing her teeth, Maria said.
She'll want to say goodnight again before you go. They sat together on the small sofa, and Marcus felt the weight of everything he wanted to say but wasn't sure how to express.
Maria, he began carefully, I want you to know that my friendship with Emma is genuine.
I'm not trying to... I don't have any ulterior motives. She's helped me remember things about myself that I thought I'd lost. Maria studied his face in the dim light of the living room lamp. What kinds of things? Marcus struggled to find the right words. How to be happy about simple things.
How to care about someone else's well-being more than your own comfort. How to hope for things that aren't about money or business success.
Those are important things to remember, Maria said softly. She talks about you constantly, Marcus continued. About how hard you work, how much you sacrifice for her. You've raised an incredible daughter, Maria. You should be proud. Maria's eyes filled with tears again.
Some days I feel like I'm failing her. Like she deserves a father, a bigger apartment, a mother who isn't always exhausted.
If I may say so, Marcus said gently, I think you're being too hard on yourself. Emma doesn't need things. She needs exactly what you're giving her. Love, attention, security, values. The rest is just... He paused, searching for the right word. Details? Maria supplied, echoing his earlier comment. Details, he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of the evening's conversations.
Then Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas covered in painted stars, her hair freshly braided for sleep.
"I'm ready for bed," she announced, "but I wanted to say goodnight to Marcus again." She hugged him once more, and this time Marcus felt confident enough to return the embrace properly.
"Thank you for sharing your mama with me tonight," he told her. "And thank you for sharing your beautiful home." "Thank you for being my friend," Emma replied seriously. And for bringing mama flowers, she kept smiling at them all during dinner. As Marcus prepared to leave, Maria walked him to the door while Emma waited in the living room. "Thank you for tonight," Maria said quietly. "It's been a long time since Emma was this excited about anything. And it's been even longer since I had adult conversation that wasn't about work or bills or logistics. Thank you for trusting me with your home," Marcus replied, "for letting me see where Emma's strength and wisdom come from." Maria smiled. She gets the wisdom from her grandmother. The strength, well, life teaches you that whether you want to learn it or not. "You're both remarkable," Marcus said sincerely. As he waited for the elevator, Marcus could hear Emma's voice through the apartment door, chattering excitedly to her mother about the evening. The sound of their conversation, warm and animated despite the late hour, followed him all the way home to his silent penthouse. That night, for the first time in years, Marcus fell asleep thinking not about tomorrow's meetings or next quarter's projections, but about the way Maria's eyes had lit up when she talked about her restaurant dreams, and the way Emma's hug had felt like coming home to something he hadn't even known he was looking for. He was beginning to understand that wealth wasn't about what you owned, but about who you had to share it with. And for the first time since his parents died, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't destined to spend his life alone. The Monday morning after dinner at the Rodriguez apartment, Marcus sat in his office staring out at the city skyline, but his mind was entirely focused on the conversation he'd had with his human resources director an hour earlier. Jennifer Walsh had been intrigued by his request to explore opportunities for exceptional candidates from disadvantaged backgrounds, and when he'd mentioned Maria's work ethic and restaurant experience, she'd immediately suggested several positions that might be suitable. But as Marcus reviewed the job descriptions, front desk coordinator at one of his hotels, events assistant at the corporate headquarters, customer service supervisor, he realized none of them captured what he'd seen in Maria Rodriguez. These were good jobs with decent benefits, significant steps up from cleaning offices and working grocery store shifts, but they weren't dreams. They were just better versions of making do. What stayed with him was the light in Maria's eyes when she'd talked about her restaurant vision, the way her voice had changed when she described wanting to create a place where people felt welcomed and belonged. That wasn't just a career aspiration. That was a calling. Marcus had spent 15 years building an empire by recognizing opportunity and matching it with the right people. He'd made his fortune by seeing potential where others saw only risk. As he sat in his office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he began to wonder if this might be the most important investment decision he'd ever make. By Wednesday, he'd made up his mind, but first he needed to do his homework. Marcus spent the next 2 days conducting research with the same intensity he brought to major acquisitions. He visited a dozen restaurants in different neighborhoods, paying attention not to the expensive places he usually frequented, but to the small, family-owned establishments that seemed to radiate the kind of warmth Maria had described. He spoke with restaurant owners, studied financial models, and consulted with his network of business advisors about the food service industry. What he discovered both excited and sobered him. The restaurant business was notoriously difficult, with high failure rates and slim profit margins. Success required not just culinary skill but business acumen, marketing savvy, and the ability to manage complex operations under constant pressure. It was exactly the kind of challenging, high-risk venture that most investors would approach with extreme caution. It was also exactly the kind of opportunity that could transform lives if approached with adequate resources and proper support. On Friday evening, Marcus called Emma. It had become a routine, their brief phone conversations at the end of each week, Emma updating him on school and friends, Marcus sharing carefully edited versions of his business travels and meetings. But tonight's call had a different purpose. "Emma, I was wondering if you and your mama might like to have dinner with me again this weekend. But this time, I'd like to take you both somewhere special." Emma's excitement was immediate and infectious. "Really? Where? Somewhere fancy like your club?" "Actually, I was thinking we could go to a few restaurants. I'd like your mama's opinion on some places I've been learning about." There was a pause as Emma consulted with her mother in the background. When she returned to the phone, her voice carried a note of curiosity. "Mama wants to know if this is about business or about being friends." The directness of the question, clearly delivered straight from Maria, without diplomatic editing, made Marcus smile. He was learning that the Rodriguez women didn't believe in indirect communication. "It's about both," he said honestly. "But mostly it's about wanting to do something nice for two people who have become very important to me." Another consultation in the background. Then Emma returned with obvious delight. "Mama says yes, but she gets to pay for dessert." Marcus spent Saturday afternoon visiting 3 restaurants with Maria and Emma, ostensibly seeking Maria's professional opinion on different dining concepts and management approaches. They started with a small Italian place in Little Italy, moved on to a farm-to-table restaurant in a trendy neighborhood, and finished with a family-owned Mexican restaurant that reminded Maria of her grandmother's place. At each location, Marcus watched Maria with growing admiration. She noticed everything: how the staff interacted with customers, how efficiently the kitchen operated, which dishes generated the most enthusiasm from diners. She could analyze a restaurant's atmosphere, predict which menu items were profitable, and identify operational inefficiencies within minutes of sitting down. More importantly, she understood the emotional component of dining in ways that most business analysts missed completely. She could explain why certain combinations of lighting, music, and decor made people feel comfortable, why some servers created instant rapport while others remained invisible, why some restaurants felt like destinations while others felt like fuel stops. Emma, meanwhile, approached each restaurant with the enthusiastic curiosity of someone experiencing new flavors and environments. She asked servers about their favorite dishes, complimented chefs when possible, and made friends with other diners' children. Marcus watched mother and daughter navigate these new spaces with grace and genuine interest, and he found himself imagining how they would transform any restaurant they touched with their natural warmth. Over dinner at the Mexican restaurant, Marcus decided it was time to be direct. "Maria, I have a business proposition for you. But before I explain it, I want you to know that this has nothing to do with my friendship with Emma. Whether you're interested or not, whether it works out or not, Emma and I will always be friends. This is completely separate." Maria set down her fork and gave him her full attention. Emma, sensing the seriousness of the moment, stopped chattering about the restaurant's colorful murals and listened intently. "I'd like to help you open your restaurant," Marcus continued. "Not as charity, but as an investment. I'd provide the startup capital and business support, and you'd provide the vision, the management, and the heart. We'd be partners." The silence that followed was the longest 60 seconds of Marcus's recent memory. Maria stared at him with an expression that cycled through shock, suspicion, hope, and fear in rapid succession. Emma looked back and forth between them, clearly trying to understand the implications of what she'd just heard. "I don't understand," Maria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus had prepared for this reaction. "You have everything it takes to run a successful restaurant: culinary skills, work ethic, business instincts, and most importantly, the ability to make people feel welcomed and cared for. What you don't have is capital and infrastructure. I can provide those things." "Why?" Maria asked, her voice stronger now but still tinged with disbelief. "Because I've spent the last 15 years building businesses, and I've never seen anyone with your combination of talent and heart." "Because Emma has taught me that the best investments aren't just about financial returns, they're about creating something meaningful. And because I believe your dream could become something special." Maria looked at Emma, who was practically vibrating with excitement, despite clearly not understanding all the adult implications of the conversation. "Mama, does this mean you could have your restaurant?" Emma asked. "The one where families feel welcome and people eating alone feel like they belong?" The accuracy with which Emma had remembered and repeated her mother's vision brought tears to Maria's eyes. "I don't know, Mija. This is very complicated." Marcus leaned forward, sensing her uncertainty. "Maria, I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you, or because I want to play hero. I'm offering it because I think we could create something extraordinary together. You'd have complete creative control over the concept, the menu, the atmosphere. I'd handle the business side, the financing, the logistics. We'd be equal partners in every sense." "But what if it fails?" Maria asked, voicing the fear that was clearly at the heart of her hesitation.
What if I disappoint you?
"What if I lose your money and ruin everything?" "Then we'll have failed together," Marcus said simply, "and we'll figure out what to do next." "But Maria, I've been watching you for weeks now. I've seen how you work, how you think, how you care for people. I don't think failure is something you need to worry about." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "Mama, remember what you always tell me? That dreams are just goals that need more courage?" Maria looked at her daughter, then at Marcus, then back at Emma. "This is a very big dream, Mija. But you have very big courage.
Emma replied seriously. Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and anxiety.
He'd made billion-dollar deals with less emotional investment than he had in Maria's response to his proposal. But then, he'd never before offered to partner with someone whose answer would affect not just business prospects, but his growing sense of family.
"Can I think about it?" Maria asked finally. "Of course," Marcus said immediately. "Take as much time as you need. And I'd encourage you to have an attorney review any agreement before you sign anything.
I want you to be completely comfortable with every aspect of this partnership."
Maria nodded, still looking somewhat overwhelmed.
I've dreamed about this for years, but I never imagined it could actually happen.
I'm not sure I know how to process this. What questions can I answer for you? Marcus asked. What would help you feel more confident about the decision? Maria was quiet for a long moment, clearly organizing her thoughts. I guess I want to understand what this partnership would really look like. What would my responsibilities be? What would yours be? How would we make decisions? What happens if we disagree about something important? Marcus appreciated the thoughtfulness of her questions. She was approaching this opportunity with the same careful consideration she brought to everything else in her life. "Those are all excellent questions," he said. "Would you be willing to meet with me and my attorney next week? We could go through all the details, talk about different scenarios, make sure you understand exactly what you'd be committing to." "And what you'd be committing to," Maria added pointedly. Marcus smiled. "And what I'd be committing to. This would be a real partnership, Maria. Your success would be my success, and vice versa."
Emma had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of someone trying to understand concepts that were just beyond her current comprehension. Finally, she spoke up with the directness that Marcus had come to expect from her. "Mr. Marcus, are you going to be like family now?" "Like really family?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond business partnerships and restaurant ventures. Marcus looked at Emma's hopeful face, then at Maria's expression of surprise and something that might have been longing. "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "I hope that your mama and I can be good friends and good business partners. And you and I will always be special friends, no matter what happens with the restaurant." Emma nodded solemnly, but Marcus could see that his answer hadn't quite addressed the heart of her question. She wasn't asking about friendship or business relationships. She was asking about belonging, about the possibility of expanding their small family of two to include someone who would become important to both of them. Maria seemed to understand this too. "Emma, sweetheart, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is a big decision and I need to think about it carefully."
"But you want to, right, Mama?" Emma asked hopefully.
"You want to have your restaurant?" Maria's smile was soft and full of love. "Yes, mija. I want to, very much. I just need to make sure I understand everything before I say yes." As they finished dinner and prepared to leave, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and nervousness that was becoming familiar whenever he thought about his evolving relationship with the Rodriguez family. He'd offered Maria a business partnership, but Emma's question had made him realize that what he was really offering and what he was really hoping for was much more complex than that. He was offering them a chance to build something together, not just a restaurant, but a life that included all three of them in ways that were still being defined. On the drive home, with Emma chattering excitedly about restaurant possibilities in the back seat, and Maria quietly thoughtful in the passenger seat, Marcus found himself imagining a future that looked completely different from the solitary success he'd been pursuing for 15 years. It was a future that included Sunday dinners and birthday parties and school plays and business meetings where the most important outcomes weren't measured in profits, but in the happiness of people he'd come to love. It was a future that scared him as much as it excited him, because it required him to risk not just his money, but his heart. But looking at Maria's reflection in the passenger window, seeing the way she smiled when Emma laughed, feeling the warmth of being included in their small family circle, Marcus realized that some risks were worth taking. Some dreams were worth investing in, not because they guaranteed returns, but because they'd promised to transform everyone involved in ways that couldn't be measured on any balance sheet. As he pulled into their apartment complex and watched Emma hug Maria goodnight, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. Whatever Maria decided about the restaurant, he was going to find ways to be part of their lives. They had taught him that success without connection was just elaborate loneliness, and he was finally ready to build something more meaningful than wealth. He was ready to build a family. 2 weeks after Marcus's restaurant proposal, Maria called him on a Tuesday evening. Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that immediately captured his attention. "Marcus, I've made my decision about the restaurant. But before I tell you what it is, I need to ask you something." And I need you to be completely honest with me. Marcus set aside the contract he'd been reviewing and gave her his full attention. Of course. Ask me anything. Are you doing this because you care about me and Emma as people, or because you're trying to fix something in yourself? Because if it's the second one, that's not fair to any of us. The directness of her question caught Marcus off guard, but he realized he should have expected it. Maria had consistently demonstrated an ability to cut through surface politeness and address underlying truths. It was one of the qualities that made her such a remarkable person and would make her such a strong business partner. Both, he said after a moment of honest consideration. I am trying to fix something in myself. I'm trying to learn how to be part of a family again, how to care about people in ways that go beyond business relationships. But Maria, I wouldn't risk your dreams or Emma's future just to solve my own problems. I'm offering this partnership because I genuinely believe you have what it takes to succeed, and because I want to be part of building something meaningful with two people who have changed my life. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Marcus found himself holding his breath while Maria processed his response. Okay, she said finally. My answer is yes, but I have conditions. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by curiosity. What conditions? First, Emma's well-being comes before everything else. If this business partnership ever creates stress or instability in her life, we end it immediately, no matter how successful it is. Agreed, Marcus said without hesitation. Second, I want equal partnership in every sense. Equal say in decisions. Equal responsibility for success or failure. I won't be your employee or your charity case. I'll be your partner. That's exactly what I want too, Marcus replied. Third, Maria continued, her voice taking on a note of vulnerability. I need you to understand that Emma has become very attached to you. She talks about you constantly, plans activities she wants to do with you, asks when you're coming to dinner again. If you're going to be in our lives as a business partner, you're also going to be in our lives as family. And if you're not ready for that responsibility, we need to know now. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. Family, the word he'd been afraid to hope for, spoken aloud by someone who was offering to make it real. Maria, he said quietly, there's nothing I want more than to be family with you and Emma. I know I'm still learning how to do that, and I know I'll probably make mistakes, but yes, I'm ready for that responsibility. He heard what sounded like a sigh of relief on the other end of the line. Good. Because Emma is already planning our first family restaurant meeting, and she has a lot of ideas about kid-friendly menu options. Marcus laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. I'd expect nothing less from her. When do we start? How about dinner this Sunday? Emma wants to cook for you this time. She's been practicing her pancake recipe. Pancakes for dinner sounds perfect, Marcus said. Should I bring anything?
Just yourself, Maria replied.
And maybe some patience. Emma's pancakes are enthusiastic but not always symmetrical. That Sunday evening, Marcus arrived at the Rodriguez apartment with a small gift for Emma, a children's cookbook focused on international cuisine that he thought might appeal to her curiosity about different cultures and flavors. He also brought a bottle of wine for Maria and, after some consideration, a small potted herb garden that could sit on their apartment balcony. Emma greeted him at the door, wearing an apron that was clearly too big for her and a smile that could have powered the entire building.
Marcus!
You're just in time. I made pancakes and they look like, well, they don't look like circles, but they taste really good. The apartment smelled like vanilla and butter, and Marcus could see that considerable effort had been put into making dinner special. The table was set with their best dishes. The sunflowers he'd brought 2 weeks earlier were still prominently displayed, and Emma had clearly been experimenting with table decorations involving hand-drawn place cards and what appeared to be a centerpiece made from colored paper flowers. Emma, this looks amazing, Marcus said, genuinely moved by the care that had gone into preparing for his visit. Maria emerged from the kitchen, laughing as she tried to clean flour off her shirt. She's been planning this meal for 3 days. I tried to help, but she informed me that this was her project. Emma proudly led Marcus to the table, where a stack of irregularly shaped but golden brown pancakes waited alongside fresh fruit and what appeared to be homemade syrup.
I made the syrup myself, Emma announced.
With honey and cinnamon and a little bit of vanilla. Mama helped me with the stove part, but I did all the measuring. As they sat down to eat, Marcus was struck by the domesticity of the moment. Here he was, sharing pancakes for dinner with a 7-year-old who had made them with her own hands, and a woman who had become one of the most important people in his world. It was completely different from any evening he'd imagined for himself, and it was perfect. "These are delicious, Emma," he said after his first bite. "You're a natural chef, just like your mama." Emma beamed with pride. "Mama says cooking is like love that you can taste. Do you think my pancakes taste like love?" Marcus looked at this child who had approached his table 3 months ago with a simple question and had somehow managed to crack open his entire understanding of what made life worth living. "They taste like the best kind of love," he said honestly. "The kind that comes from caring about someone enough to want to make them happy." Emma nodded seriously. "That's exactly what I was trying to put in them." As they ate dinner, they talked about the restaurant plans. Emma had indeed prepared a list of suggestions for kid-friendly menu options, complete with drawings of what she thought the dishes should look like. Her ideas ranged from practical, mac and cheese but with different-shaped pasta so it's more fun, to elaborate, a burger that looks like a flower with veggie petals. Maria had been doing her own research, visiting potential locations and developing menu concepts that would reflect her grandmother's recipes while appealing to a broad range of customers. She'd been sketching restaurant layouts and thinking about how to create the kind of welcoming atmosphere she'd described weeks earlier. "I found a space that might be perfect," she told Marcus. "It's in a neighborhood with lots of families, near a community center and an elementary school. The rent is reasonable, and it has a big window that would be perfect for displaying fresh herbs and vegetables." Marcus made a mental note to look at the space with her, but for now he was content to listen to her vision and watch Emma add her own enthusiastic commentary. "Can we have a kids' corner with books and crayons?" Emma asked. "So kids can draw pictures while they wait for their food, and then we can hang their pictures on the walls?" "That's a wonderful idea," Maria said, ruffling her daughter's hair. "What do you think, Marcus?" "I think Emma should be our official consultant for family-friendly atmosphere," Marcus replied. "She clearly understands what makes children feel welcome." Emma practically glowed with importance. "I could test all the kid food too, to make sure it tastes good." After dinner, while Maria cleaned up despite Marcus's offers to help, Emma showed him the cookbook he'd brought and began planning what she called their international cooking adventures. "We could try a different country every month," she suggested. "And then if we like the recipes, maybe Mama could put them on the restaurant menu." Marcus was continuously amazed by Emma's ability to connect different aspects of life into cohesive plans. She wasn't just thinking about cooking as a fun activity. She was thinking about it as a way to contribute to their shared restaurant venture. "That sounds like an excellent plan," he agreed. "Which country should we start with?" Emma considered this seriously. "Maybe Italy, because Mama already knows how to make amazing Italian food. Or maybe Mexico, to honor great-grandma's recipes. Or maybe," she paused, looking slightly shy, "maybe China, because that's where you're from, and I'd like to learn about your family too."
Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion.
Emma's desire to learn about his heritage, to connect with his background as a way of including him more fully in their family, touched something deep in his heart. "I'd love to teach you about Chinese cooking," he said softly. "My mother had some recipes that I haven't made in years. Maybe it's time I learned them again." When it came time for Emma's bedtime routine, she asked if Marcus could stay until after her bath so he could say goodnight properly. As Maria got Emma ready for bed, Marcus found himself tidying up the kitchen automatically, as if this domestic routine was something he'd been part of for years rather than hours.
When Emma emerged from her bedroom in her star-covered pajamas, she hugged Marcus goodnight with the same natural affection she'd shown from their first meeting.
But this time, the hug lingered a little longer, and when she pulled back, her expression was unusually serious. "Marcus, can I ask you something important?" "Always," he replied. "Are you going to stay with us? I mean, really stay, even when things get hard or complicated." The question hit Marcus like a physical force. Here was a 7-year-old girl who had already experienced the loss of her father, who had learned that the adults in her life could disappear without warning, asking for reassurance that he understood what he was committing to. Marcus knelt down so he could look Emma directly in the eyes. "Emma, I promise you that I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be your family for as long as you want me to be. That means when things are easy and when they're hard, when you're happy and when you're sad, when you succeed and when you make mistakes. That's what family means, staying no matter what." Emma studied his face with those wise eyes that never failed to see right through to the truth. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she smiled and gave him another quick hug. "Good," she said matter-of-factly, "because Mama needs someone to take care of her too, and she pretends she doesn't, but she really does." After Emma went to bed, Marcus and Maria sat together on the small sofa, discussing practical aspects of their business partnership. But Marcus found his attention drifting to the domestic details that surrounded them. Emma's artwork on the walls, the sound of her movements as she settled into sleep in the next room, the comfortable way he and Maria had fallen into conversation about their shared future. "Marcus," Maria said eventually, her voice soft in the apartment's evening quiet. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you think your parents would think about all this? About Emma? About the restaurant? About us?" Marcus considered the question seriously. He'd thought about his parents often in recent weeks, wondering how they would react to the changes in his life, imagining their response to Emma's wisdom and Maria's strength. "I think they'd be amazed," he said finally. "I think they'd love Emma immediately. How could anyone not? And I think they'd be grateful to you for teaching me how to be part of a family again." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Emma asked me the other day if I thought her daddy would like you. She said she thought he would because you take care of us the way daddies are supposed to take care of their families." Marcus felt his chest constrict with the weight of responsibility and love that Emma's observation represented. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that her daddy's most important wish was for her to be happy and loved and safe, and that I thought he would be very grateful to know that she has someone else in her life who cares about those same things." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, both processing the emotional complexity of building a family from the remnants of loss and loneliness. "Maria," Marcus said eventually, "I want you to know that tonight, the restaurant, our partnership, our friendship, this is the most important thing I've ever done. More important than any business deal, any acquisition, any achievement I've had in my professional life." Maria turned to look at him, and in her eyes Marcus saw the same mixture of hope and vulnerability that he'd been carrying since that first lunch with Emma. "For me too," she said quietly. "When Emma's father died, I thought that was it for us. I thought we'd just be a family of two forever, managing on our own, making do with what we had. I never imagined that someone would come into our lives and want to build something bigger with us." Marcus reached over and took her hand, a gesture that felt both natural and monumentally significant. "Emma was right that first day," he said. "That really was too big a table for just one person." Maria smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Good thing she's brave enough to ask the important questions." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of Rodriguez family restaurant, watching Emma carefully arrange fresh flowers in small vases for each table while Maria put finishing touches on the evening's featured dishes. The restaurant had exceeded all their projections, drawing customers not just for the exceptional food, but for the warm, welcoming atmosphere that made everyone feel like they were being invited into someone's home. Emma had become the restaurant's unofficial greeter, charming customers with her enthusiasm and making sure every child who entered felt special. Maria had grown into her role as head chef and co-owner with confidence and creativity, developing a reputation for innovative dishes that combined traditional flavors with modern presentation. And Marcus had discovered that the most satisfying success wasn't measured in profit margins or expansion opportunities, but in the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through the restaurant dining room, and in the way Maria's face lit up when she talked about their plans for the future.
"Marcus!"
Emma called from the dining room. "Come see. Mrs. Patterson from school brought her whole family to try our food." As Marcus walked into the dining room to greet their guests, he passed the corner table where he'd first met Emma 9 months earlier. It was occupied now by a young family, the children coloring on the paper tablecloths while their parents enjoyed a leisurely dinner. Marcus smiled, remembering the loneliness he'd carried to that same table, the isolation he'd mistaken for independence, the empty chairs he'd surrounded himself with as protection against the risk of caring and being cared for in return. Emma had been right that first day. It really had been too big a table for just one person. But now he understood that the solution wasn't finding a smaller table. The solution was finding the courage to invite others to join you. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the bravest person at the table would be a 7-year-old girl who wasn't afraid to ask the question that could change everything. "Can I join you?" The answer Marcus had learned should always be yes.